So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, depending on where you are in the ICEA world. I'm Megan Jones, your Executive Director, here with the winning team of the 2026 ICEA Cost Challenge. Cost Challenge is something that ICEA came up with a couple of years ago where we get between 3 and 5 junior estimators per team to give them a clever, creative question where they can come up with a cost estimate that answers it in an interesting and unique way. And Boeing knocked the socks off of our judges this year, so we're glad to be able to share that with the rest of you. The team was tasked with settling New Jamestown, a human settlement on Mars by 2050. This was inspired by us having our ICEA workshop in Norfolk, just a short distance from one of the original settlements in the United States. So please welcome Chris, Gates, Hunter, Jessica, Sadie, and Jessica and Sadie. Sorry about that. From our winning cost challenge team. Take it away, guys.
Hey everyone, we'll get started. We're really excited to show you what we did for the 2026 ICEA Cost Challenge. So our story begins in 1607 when 104 settlers landed on unfamiliar shores with limited resources and no guarantee of survival. This was the beginning of the first successful English settlement in North America, Jamestown. Today we revisit that same spirit of exploration, this time on Mars. Especially as support for space exploration grows, so too does answering the question, what will it truly cost, not just to reach Mars, but to live there? For context, the U.S. government, in coordination with NASA, aims to establish a settlement on Mars in 2050 and sustain it through 2059 as the final mission in the Moon to Mars initiative. Especially where other missions like the Artemis, the SAM analog, and the Moon base are well underway, attention has now turned to Mars. Because the greatest management leverage over whole life cost occurs early in a program, and the opportunity to avoid cost declines rapidly over time, our team has been tasked to develop a defensible cost estimate for planning, delivering, operating, and growing a permanent settlement on Mars within a 3-week timeline. The Mars settlement will be called New Jamestown, both in honor of our nation's history and because of the similarities between Jamestown and New Jamestown. Both have fragile survival conditions, so we have prioritized safety and redundancy for the Mars settlement in our cost model. Jamestown had a high dependency on resupply from England. Mars, likewise, will be dependent on Earth logistics and supplies, which we aim to reduce over time. The original colony faced catastrophic early losses, mostly from underestimating what survival required. We have included survival assurance in our scope. Just as Jamestown was not self-sufficient in 10 years, New Jamestown is not expected to achieve full self-sufficiency within the same time frame. And the government of both directly evolved as the settlements grow, so expansion and government costs are included in our cost model. We did not model a perfect Mars settlement, we modeled a fragile one that becomes more sustainable over time. We also built our estimate on ensuring that the trials of Jamestown are not repeated or, in the very least, are significantly reduced on Mars. With that introduction, we'd like to introduce you to New Jamestown. With a target population of roughly 400 inhabitants by 2059, our whole estimate captures the whole life cost from 2050 to 2059. Since the site of Jamestown was considered poor, specifically because it was chosen for defense as opposed to settlement, NASA has already extensively researched and chosen the site of our home away from home on Arcadia Planitia. Successful human landing architecture studies support this site for a long-term settlement when compared to other sites like Gale Crater that are better suited for small research teams. Arcadia Planitia's unique combination of resources, accessibility, and relative safety makes it the preferred site for New Jamestown. There is confirmed near-surface water ice to minimize water extraction costs, the terrain minimizes entry, descent, and landing risk, and the location reduces heating and power costs compared to sites on Martian poles. We are your cost estimating team. I'm Sadie Baldwin, the project manager.
I'm Jessica Abercrombie, the logistics and data lead.
I'm Chris Royals, the cost integration lead.
Gates Gorman, life support lead.
And Hunter Shepard, the analytics lead.
And a special thanks to Jeannie Durkis, our mentor, for providing guidance and answering key questions during development of the cost model. Our cost model estimates that the cost to establish and sustain New Jamestown is $11.4 trillion. Yes, it's a T. Our presentation will follow the agenda as outlined on the right to better understand our estimate. I will now hand things over to Gates to explain our ground rules and assumptions.
Thank you, Sadie. Before we could dive into our ground rules and assumptions, we first had to define what mission success meant to us. For us, our primary concern is human life. This means our successful mission must include continuous life support without interruption, ongoing resupply to avoid any Jamestown-style setbacks in the beginning, scalable infrastructure to support the incoming population, government evolution like Jamestown eventually achieved, and of course, the psychological and physical wellness for our settlers. We intentionally biased the model for near-term costs and risk to avoid any mistakes that were made at the original settlement. We didn't want to underestimate the burden of what this endeavor would be. We needed to make ground rules to begin to bound the scope of our estimate. Here are some of the main ground rules we identified. Sadie went over a lot of these in the problem framing, so thank you. But I want to point out a couple more that play a large part in our final estimate. First, we followed the CBOT guidance of a WBS-based model. We'll go into that more later. All funding follows the government scientific model, so you'll see no profit or markup included. Costs reflect fully burdened government expenditures, and as requested, all costs are shown in 2026 dollars. We developed our assumptions early since they affect the entire model. Some of the key assumptions are here on the screen, but there's a couple I wanted to point out. First, the pre-investment baseline. To estimate something never attempted, we had to assume all technology we have or are developing today will be Mars capable, scalable, and available to us by our launch date. Another one to point out is the mission success rate. We built our base estimates in the WBS structure under the assumption that all resupplier cargo shipments would be successful. But as human life is our primary concern, we built in contingency and redundancy costs to our model, as well as evacuation costs to make sure our settlers will remain safe in the case of mishaps. And then, of course, all ground rules and assumptions will have a huge impact on the model as a result, and because they are the foundation on which we build that model. Here are some of the main that we identified as shaping some of our major cost drivers. We also have to think about what we exclude from our estimate at this point. For example, what I mentioned earlier, the pre-investment baseline. That means we are assuming all R&D from ongoing programs such as Artemis, the lunar infrastructure studies, and the MOXIE in situ oxygen creation studies, and much more are going to be fully developed by the time of launch. So all R&D costs that would lead up to that point are not included in our estimate. We're also excluding the costs associated with births on Mars and following the original Jamestown approach of population growth through incoming settlers. I'll talk a little bit about our AI and its place in this estimate. To meet the requested quick turn 3-week time frame, we leveraged AI to accelerate the process. We mainly used AI to accelerate source discovery, analog identification, and early WBS framing, along with cross-checking cost ratios and generating first draft content. A key part of our validation approach was using multiple AI tools to cross-compare outputs and not to rely on a single source. We then verified those outputs against primary sources and anchored key assumptions to documented data. Importantly, AI did not build our model, perform calculations, or make cost decisions. Next, I'll hand over to Chris for a look at our data strategy.
Thank you, Gates. So we utilized multiple AI tools to quickly explore sources, build familiarity with relevant topics, identify analogs, and refine WBS relevant inputs from a large data set. Primary sources were prioritized because of their credibility. Some examples of primary sources include government reports, audits. We used secondary sources and validated them through cross-checking against independent references. Our data was often limited. So for example, NASA frequently groups costs into broad buckets rather than providing detailed descriptive line items. We address these gaps through triangulation and normalization, and we ensured to clearly document assumptions in order to maintain traceability in our estimate. As you can see, we compiled over 150 data sources, over 70% of which are primary sources. AI was used to support data aggregation and extraction, but all inputs were validated against the original source documents. Any extracted data was also manually reviewed for accuracy. We used a blended normalization approach to convert values to fiscal year 2026 dollars using the three indices shown here: the NASA New Start Inflation Index, the GDP deflator, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index. The index was selected based on the nature of each cost type. So, for example, NASA-like hardware and mission-unique systems were normalized using the NSII. Broader program and support costs were normalized using the GDP deflator, and then consumables such as food were normalized using the Consumer Price Index. Where costs reflected a mix of categories, weighted splits were applied, with AI being used in some cases to help assess the most appropriate allocation. Overall, approximately 74% of dollarized sources used NASA's NSII, about 23% used the GDP deflator, and then everything else using the Consumer Price Index. So while there are four types of data limitations you see, three challenges in particular are most significant for this estimate. First, even within available sources, the data was often inconsistent. Costs were often reported at a high level, definitions could vary across programs, and some cost elements are not tracked or publicly disclosed. Second, there was no true apples to apples analog for a Martian settlement. So we had to rely on adjacent space programs such as the International Space Station and the Chippewa Housing Project, as well as other analogs such as the Antarctic research stations, recognizing that they don't fully capture the complexities of the Martian environment. And this was our largest source of uncertainty. Third, these limitations required us to manage estimation gaps directly. We addressed them through triangulation across multiple sources, normalization, and estimator judgment, while ensuring to carry uncertainty throughout our model. So perfect data does not exist, but we used the best available information and built the estimate to transparently reflect uncertainty and support future refinement as more data becomes available. So now I will hand it over to Hunter to discuss our model approach.
Thank you, Chris. So this is our work breakdown structure. We started with the recommended 7 WBS scopes, but as we identified different cost drivers, those 7 WBS scopes grew into 11 WBS scopes. The 11 WBS scopes were further defined into level 2 scope breakdowns, as shown on the outline boxes on the right-hand side. We then organize our WBS scopes into 6 distinct categories based on common NASA cost buckets, as shown in the solid colored boxes on the left. Each WBS element also reflects a Jamestown style constraint: resupply dependent, survival redundancy, or phased growth. An example of that would be in transportation and development, that it reflects continuous resupply needs. Here's our input decision tree. We organize all of our inputs into 3 categories: evidence-based, assumed, and placeholder. Evidence-based data reflects high confident data that we're able to normalize to fiscal year 2026 dollars and apply directly to the model. Each input, regardless of the type, was validated through benchmarks, reasonable checks, and sensitivity. AI was especially used for the assume and placeholder data, also known as the estimator's judgment, was utilized to speed up the validation process. Due to the Jamestown style and its first-of-the-kind nature of a Mars settlement, the majority of the inputs fall into assumed data, making the validation process extra essential. Any placeholder inputs were supported by multiple data sources and flagged as an uncertainty driver. If the available data did not fit into one of these categories, we went back and redefined our assumptions or pivoted to a different direction in our model. This ensured that our model remained traceable and defensible. We then wanted to incorporate the CBOC 2.0 method. So using those methods that are outlined in CBOC 2.0, you'll notice our methodology uses a hybrid approach with a mixed methods approach closely mirroring the data maturity. Where we had strong, high confident data, which is our evidence and our assumed data, we leaned on analogy and parametric methods. As uncertainty increased, we transitioned to extrapolation and build-up approaches. Top-down build-up particularly were used in scopes where it included first-of-a-kind elements such as WS 10.0, the quality of life. The quality of life in 10.0 it includes recreation facilities and dining facilities of things to upkeep a human life. So we let the data maturity drive the methodologies section, ensuring that every part of the model was handled appropriately. As we were building the model, we noticed that standard analogs didn't capture the additional complexity in Mars. So if something was built on Earth, is that the same cost to build on Mars or to transport? So we have introduced the Mars complexity factor. This was developed to bridge that gap of those costs. It's based on the observed cost increases from the Mars missions, particularly the rovers and the actuals that were. These are only applied to our analog and data inputs that don't already reflect Mars conditions. This allowed us to maintain realistic values without double counting complexity. So these Mars complexity factors are applied to surface infrastructure and R&D, but they're not applied to program management or already Mars analogs. So these are not applied to Mars peer-reviewed documents or articles that have been published that already have that factor in it, but they are applied to things such as building a home. Here on Earth, it won't be the same cost on Mars. So it should be noted that our Mars complexity factor is a range of 2.5 to 7. This is a data-informed midpoint factor, and we use the factor of 4, which is most commonly applied to our Mars complexity factor in our WBS elements. Additionally, our team came up with, we distributed costs against 4 different phases. So phase 0 is your pre-deployment is a period of 2 years where costs are research and development and cargo heavy. The population of this is 0. We're just sending our products and our material up, but the population is 0. Phase 1, the first crew arrives. We're having a population of 40 people. Survivability is the goal, and the most costs here are the infrastructure and life support. So this is when we're sending our first set of people, our scientists, our doctors up, our astronauts. Phase 2, this is the big expansion period over 3 years where the population grows from 40 to 150. These costs focus on building sustainable systems like water extraction and expanding surface operations. The last phase, phase 3, is growing New Jamestown into its operation phase in our governance phase. So this will have our total population around 400. Each WBS element has a weighted cost for each phase to calculate the cost distribution. Intensity was usually correlated with the population as the population increases, but not always. An example of this, phases 0 and 1 is heavy and front-loaded in R&D, rather than phases 2 and 3 is back-loaded heavy in governance and operations. Now on to our risk and uncertainties.
For our analysis, we ran Monte Carlo simulations on the top 5 highest cost WBS elements. Using our data sources, we established minimum and maximum uncertainty ranges for each input, then assigned distribution types based on our confidence in the underlying source data. We ran 10,000 simulations to estimate the confidence of the resulting cost estimates. So as shown here, most confidence levels fall in the 40 to 60% range. Given that this is a large-scale effort with no direct precedent, that level of uncertainty we feel is expected. Sensitivity analysis helps us answer the question, why does it happen? As you can see, cost elements from WBS 2.0, which is our transportation element, represent both the largest risk and the greatest opportunity for cost savings. Much of the uncertainty comes from variables such as the number of people per ship and cargo capacity, since these systems are still in active development and final specifications have not yet been determined. WBS 2.1 specifically has the largest overall impact and reflects the greatest magnitude of uncertainty, but WBS 2.3 was selected by us for deeper analysis because it presents a more actionable opportunity for cost mitigation. While both elements are highly uncertain, WBS 2.3 is more directly influenced by cargo delivery assumptions that could potentially be refined earlier in the estimate lifecycle to reduce the right tail of the distribution and improve the estimate. So I'll hand it over to Jessica to go into detail about WBS 2.3.
Thanks, Chris. Now we'll walk through how all of our decision logic and rationale is put to practice. Rather than walking through every step, this workflow shows how our confidence in our estimate evolved over 3 weeks, from defining a Jamestown-style scope to validation and delivery. We started with scope, data strategy, and model development. We built a clean roll-up structure to ensure full traceability and eliminate all double counting across WBS elements. Then we layered in risk and uncertainty to identify where risk was concentrated, which directly informs our decision-making. In the final phase, we performed reasonableness and validation checks to ensure outputs aligned with both analog and overall program expectations. So by the end of week 3, we had a fully traceable, risk-informed estimate that shows cost-driving elements where risk resides and showed us what needed to be managed. In this section, we'll walk through how we built our cost model from the ground up, starting with our Jamestown-driven structure, applying disciplined data and methodology choices, and demonstrating the process through WBS 2.3 cargo transportation as our example. We started with our Level 1 WBS of transportation and logistics. We further defined Level 2 WBS scopes. The Level 3 WBS descriptions ensured no overlap and that we were capturing all necessary data. As mentioned, we will be focusing on WBS 2.3 of cargo delivery for our example. For data strategy and validation, a combination of evidence-based data, assumed data, and placeholder and estimator judgment was required to verify all costs of our scope were included. Analogs were appropriate and any overlapping scope was excluded. In the example of WBS 2.3 for cargo delivery, we utilized the Starship cargo as our technical anchor. We modeled cargo shipments to launch within the 26-month alignment windows for Earth and Mars. Within the 10-year timeline, we have 5 total launch windows. You'll notice that Phase 2 is the only phase that captures 2 launch windows, while all other phases only have 1 window each. We created a schedule that is cargo heavy in Phase 0 when we don't have any settlers on Mars. This way we can avoid the past mistakes of Jamestown. Since mission success is defined as human success, we start to lower the amount of cargo to ensure we can support transporting all settlers to Mars within the alignment windows. I will note our model does account for missed shipments and supplemental shipments. These costs and details are built into our model but not directly reflected in WBS 2.3 specifically. After defining the needs and necessary details for WBS 2.3, we built our costs to capture cargo ships, payload delivery, packaging, and cargo weight, which totaled $1.01 trillion for WBS 2.3 only. To capture this within our phases, we identified where the launch windows occurred. I will further call out again that Phase 2 captures 2 launch windows, which is what is driving Phase 2 to capture the majority of our cargo costs at $416 billion. As mentioned, this also tapers down in Phase 3 when we are increasing our crew transport and lowering our cargo transport. This is our roll-up structure from a Level 2 WBS elements all to our Level 1 WBS element into our total costs. We use standard aggregation to avoid overlap or double counting and applied contingency at the level where uncertainty exists. This results in a traceable estimate from the top line cost down to individual drivers. After running risk and uncertainty analysis for WBS 2.3, we found that our estimate was aligned within the 49th percentile. Our key drivers could be attributed to cargo mass and total quantity of shipments. Lastly, to validate all estimates, our team completed benchmark and reasonableness checks. We supplemented with AI to capture our specific ground rules and assumptions for a reasonableness check. This was cross-validated by using multiple AI tools from multiple perspectives to capture any gaps or overlaps. This made it easier to look at individual WBSs due to data limitations with our own complexities applied. The bottom line was that if the model disagreed with reality, we adjusted our model, not the benchmark. I'll now pass it back to Sadie for our results.
On the following slides, we've broken the $11.4 trillion total into a few different cost breakdowns to highlight the results. So in this cost breakdown by phase, what stands out is how the costs ramp up consistently from Phase 0 through Phase 2. This reflects that front-loaded build strategy. So by the end of Phase 2, the majority of infrastructure and materials are already delivered to Mars before the large-scale population arrival. The last thing we want is our settlement population of 400 arriving on Mars, but there's no habitats or life support systems there for them. In Phase 3, costs drop off significantly because the surface infrastructure is largely in place and the settlement shifts from build-out to increased sustainment. At the WBS level, 2.0 transportation and 8.0 redundancy and reserves dominate the total cost at roughly $3.65 trillion and $3.44 trillion respectively. At the NASA cost bucket level, governance, risk, and support, which includes 1.0, 8.0, 9.0, and 11.0, this reflects the highest cost at a combined $6.63 trillion. Specifically, 8.0 redundancy and reserves is driven by the NASA 3 times redundancy requirements for critical systems. This reflects a Jamestown-style reality. So before the system is stable, survivability depends on continuous external support. So a large portion of total cost is driven not just by establishing the settlement, but by transporting the cargo and redundancy to Mars needed to sustain the population. This view shows how the primary cost drivers evolve over time and specifically by phase. 1.0 program management and 3.0 infrastructure grow steadily and then drop off in Phase 3 once build-out is complete and operations begin to stabilize. 2.0 transportation peaks in Phase 2, and this is due to the multiple launch windows, as Jessica had mentioned before, and then decreases in Phase 3, though it still remains elevated compared to the other phases, and this is due to the increased crew transportations. 8.0 and 11.0 represent our redundancy, risk, and contingency costs, which peak in Phase 1 as the first humans set foot on Mars, and then costs decline as the system becomes more stable and partially self-sufficient. This model shows human life fundamentally drives the architecture and cost structure of New Jamestown. The largest costs are not optional. They are transportation, life support, redundancy, and contingency capabilities that are required to keep people alive and well on Mars. That is why the highest concentration of risk mirrors the largest costs. And since cost and risk is not evenly distributed, focus on these systems yields the greatest potential impact. This model also shows that long-term sustainability depends heavily on future capability growth. Many assumptions rely on technological advancements that are still developing today, like 3D printing with Mars regolith, transportation scaling capabilities, and oxygen creation using the Mars atmosphere. For NASA leadership, this estimate matters because it identifies where costs and risk are concentrated before any irreversible commitments are made. It supports informed studies, prioritization, and R&D and technology investment decisions early when management has the greatest ability to influence the whole life cost. The model also provides a traceable, defensible framework for evaluating whether New Jamestown is technically, operationally, and financially sustainable. In a mission where human life defines success, cost estimation is not just a final dollar amount or total value, it becomes a survivability planning of the mission. Most importantly, the model does not remove uncertainty, giving leadership the earliest and greatest opportunity to manage it going forward.
Thank you, Sadie. I'll go over a little bit how we spent our time putting together this estimate. About 50% of our time was spent on program framing and data collection. Even with AI to accelerate early structuring, source discovery, analog identification, the sheer quantity of data available was almost overwhelming. There was also an AI learning curve for ensuring the outputs were from reputable and relevant data sources. Final validation remained human-driven, which required many manual checks even after AI was through. And of course, all final analysis and calculation was human-driven. And that encompasses activities 3 through 7 you see here. Through this process, there was many lessons we learned, but there were some that definitely stuck with us and wanted to make sure we pointed out. First, no estimate is better than its assumptions. Clearly defined and documented GRNAs allowed us to define and complete this scope and estimate. Second, uncertainty should be embraced, not avoided. Identifying cost drivers and communicating ranges at this stage is much more valuable than a single point estimate. And lastly, AI is a powerful accelerator, but not a substitute for human judgment. Human validity and judgment will always be crucial, and critical thinking will always be paramount, especially when human life is involved. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to give the audience a few minutes to come up with some questions. They can put them in the chat, but I'm going to ask mine. Tim, go ahead and write your question in the chat. We'll be able to get to it. So while those are coming in, my question was, and I kind of asked a similar question to the teams last year. What data source did you end up using that you would have never thought that you would get valuable data on it that completely surprised you? Was there something that was out of the ordinary that was a real eye opener that you didn't really consider would be part of this before you started?
I can't think of a specific single one. One thing that caught me off guard, I was doing a lot with the life support systems. And I know this probably I don't want to speak for my teammates, but I think if everyone had a similar experience. Like we mentioned in the presentation, so much of the data that is available, and NASA is always a public organization, all that data is open, but it's grouped into such high level cost buckets. If you're trying to distill it down to the cost of a certain function or certain piece of technology that already exists, it's sometimes hard, if not impossible, to really get that single point estimate. So by using that as a benchmark and test a reasonableness, whatever data we could find, I was surprised by how much we were able to translate technology that exists here on Earth, or maybe in low Earth orbit, like the International Space Station, and then in a way that I think was actually well backed up and well documented, translate that from here near Earth to a Mars estimate. So I was surprised by how much we had to look earthbound before we could then project to Mars, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It does. It's always interesting to see what kind of surprises you, especially when it's an unusual thing like question like we have.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Please.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say,
No.
as far as your question is, what was I surprised with the data that we did have? I'd actually say, at least with me, I had the opposite problem. I was kind of surprised the data that wasn't available where NASA is like a public company. I know some of that's probably just like security reasons and stuff, but especially the older missions, I was actually surprised at stuff that either isn't publicly published, or you probably like maybe they weren't tracking it. I'm not sure, but I would have thought they would have had more data on missions that had been completed for a while.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Okay.
for me, using like secondary sources, this really taught me the importance of going through the process and validating them. Because, like for instance, Wikipedia would have stuff, and you would follow the links that they would reference, and that information oftentimes wouldn't be in their reference links. So then, you
Oh,
couldn't use that data. So yeah, so just it enforced that importance.
nice. Okay, I think we have success. So one of our judges is on the line and he's got a question and a compliment. Tim, are you ready to go? Oh,
Yes, can you hear me?
there you are. How you doing?
Okay, fine, thanks. Yes, I was one of the judges for the cost challenge, and uh, to a person, we were all very impressed with this team. Remember that they only had 3 weeks from problem statement to the time that they had to give this pitch. So, so I would just like to congratulate the team on an excellent job, given that compressed time frame and some very clever uses of AI and whatnot to help them out. And my question would be, instead of 3 weeks, what if you had 6 months to do this? What would you do differently?
I think one piece that I would start off with is something that we struggled with throughout these 3 weeks was making sure that we're not going into the weeds with certain parts of our different WBSs. So I think for me specifically, like I would definitely make sure that we're going a little bit more in depth in our estimates and are getting into the weeds in some of these critical areas. So I think definitely just trying to keep it less high level and more in depth would definitely be something that we would explore within the 6 months. And yeah, that would be my insight.
For me, it would be calculating the cost per person, but essentially also will we have the same values or would our values be worth it if we were to add 100 people, making the total 500, or subtract 100 people? Would our value be the same? If the value is the same, is that worth the cost of creating this new establishment on Mars?
Yeah, and with the more time, so one of our ground rules and assumptions, we assume that all of the R&D for like the NASA Artemis missions is done and completed. So we didn't bake that cost in, but I think that is an important cost as well. So I would have liked to explore that a bit more.
Yeah, and we also, just due to time, I would assume if we're sending up a settlement to Mars, there would also be some sort of either like mining or wanting to send materials or something back to Earth, kind of like as revenue or something. But we did not include any, I guess, like financial, like economic benefit to the Mars settlement. It was more, we just treated it as they're setting people up for like research, but they're not necessarily getting anything back. I'd probably look into factoring in those costs of sending stuff back to Earth from a like a trade standpoint.
I mean, the original Jamestown guys did, right?
Yeah. They were definitely sending crops and stuff back to England,
Yeah.
so I'd want to factor that in. But yeah, just for time, we just kind of put that in our assumptions that we're just assuming that they're not sending anything back to Earth as of in that 10-year time frame, but they probably could.
Well, I'm going to say this has been fun. We haven't gotten to any more questions, so it looks like we're going to be about done for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thanks to our team for putting on such a good show and being such great sports in the competition. And of course, congratulations to Team Boeing for bringing home the trophy and the check this year. If you're into this and you'd like to see one of the other teams, next week we've got Techaloti. They're going to be presenting for us. We're hoping to get a few more of the teams to do webinars for us today, or not today, this summer. And the video recording, we are recording today, that will be up on the ICEAA.com/cost challenge website, as well as on our YouTube channel, probably around this time tomorrow. So, of course, if you have questions for ICEAA, questions for the team, email us at ICEAA@ICEAOnline.org, and I'll pass those along to who needs to get them. So I guess with that, I'm just gonna close it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, team. Best of luck. Enjoy the rest of your days and stay cool out there. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.